Let's get lifted. Let's get lifted. Let's get lifted. Let's get lifted. Let's get lifted on these ABCs. 1, 2, 3s. Take a look inside. Everything you need is right in front of you. Right inside of you on these ABCs. Hey there, Amplafii Genius Brillianaires. It's time for more icons. Some of these you will know really well, and some of them you might not know so well. Will you share them with others, please? Thank you. Thank you. All right, today we're going to start with Bayard Rustin. Born March 17th, 1912, passed August 24th, 1987. So how old was he when he passed? Mathematicians out there. All right. 87, born in 1912. All right. 14 years before the 1961 Freedom Rides and 8 years before the Montgomery bus boycott, Bayard Rustin with George Hauser led 14 men on a journey of reconciliation through 4 southern states to set adherence to the federally mandated integration of interstate buses. Rustin was arrested 18 times. 2 years later, in 1949, he served time on a North Carolina chain gang for refusing to abide by the Jim Crow laws. So Rustin was no newcomer to civil rights activism when he arrived in Montgomery, Alabama, to meet Martin Luther King Jr. He became King's confidant and mentor, encouraging his commitment to nonviolence and bringing his outstanding organizational talents to guide and structure the bus boycott. Rustin was named deputy director of the 1963 March on Washington, where he organized a brilliantly orchestrated demonstration. What made the march, he said later, was that Black people voted that day with their feet. We voted with our feet that day. All right, Bayard Rustin. And next, we're going to do Martin Luther King Jr. Born January 15th, 1929, assassinated April 4th, 1968. Okay, born Martin Luther King Jr., born in Atlanta into a family of Baptist ministers, Martin Luther King came to lead and symbolize some of the most important civil rights campaigns in the 1950s and 1960s, articulating the movement for African American civil rights as an essential fulfillment of the spirit and ideals of American democracy, and using Gandhian tactics of non-violent resistance to minimize bloodshed. King was instrumental in breaking the back of institutionalized racial segregation during those decades and in bringing unprecedented visibility and support to the cause of racial equality. In 1964, King was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, the youngest person ever to gain the honor. In his acceptance speech, he described his work as a creative battle to end the long night of racial injustice. Since his assassination in 1968, and with the designation of his birthday as a national holiday, King has assumed a place as one of the most important American leaders of the latter half of the 20th century. Of course, these are Library of Congress knowledge cards, printed by Pomegranate Publications. Library of Congress knowledge cards, Martin Luther King. All right, let's dive into Malcolm X. Born May 19th, 1925. Also assassinated February 21st, 1965. How old was he when he passed? How old was Martin Luther King? How old was Malcolm X? Mathematicians out there. Born in 1925, passed in 1965. You tell me. Malcolm X, born Malcolm X Little, was serving a prison term where he embraced the Nation of Islam and altered the course of his life. His powerful, charismatic voice brought the nation to prominence in the 1960s as he spoke with startling candor about white racism and articulated the anger of Black people who had endured it. Some African Americans were attracted to the nation's religion, but many more to the militant demand for racial justice and the idea of building a strong, independent, separate Black nation. Malcolm X broke with the nation in 1964 and traveled to Mecca, where he met Muslims of all races. He's changed his perspective that all white people were enemies and came to believe in the need for all people to work for human rights. A few months after he founded the Organization of Afro-American Unity, he was assassinated on February 21st, 1965. These are Civil Rights Movement Knowledge Cards, Library of Congress, published by Pomegranate Communications Incorporated. Okay. Next, this is one of my favorites. Ella Baker, born December 13th, 1903, passed December 13th, 1986. So she was born on December 13th and she passed on December 13th. So she wanted to be exactly how many years old was she? Born in 1903, passed in 1986. All right, 83. In 1960, Ella Baker called for a student conference to organize the spontaneous sit-ins spreading through the South. Those who gathered formed the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC. Baker was both the organization's mentor and its fervent supporter, calling their purpose bigger than a hamburger to end segregation, not only at the lunch counters, but in every aspect of life. In her long career as a civil rights activist, Baker had already served as the NAACP's director of branches. At Martin Luther King's request, she established the Southern Christian Leadership Conference's national office and was its first executive director. As an advisor to SNCC, she helped to organize voter registration projects and was pivotal in forming the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party in 1964. Fiercely and independent, Baker believed in democratic grassroots activism Baker believed in democratic grassroots activism that stressed the role of many ordinary people and not of individual leaders in achieving social and political change. She promoted grassroots organizations and organizing, as do I. Ella Baker, you are my heroine. Thank you, Ella Baker. All right. George Schuyler, born February 25th, 1895, passed August 31st, 1977. How old was he when he passed? Born in 1895, passed in 1977. George Samuel Schuyler was a writer and editor. He was one of many writers associated with the Harlem Renaissance, a period during the 1920s when Black art and literature flourished in New York City. Schuyler was co-founder of the Messenger magazine, columnist, chief editorial writer, and special correspondent to South America, the West Indies, and the Dominican Republic for the Pittsburgh Courier, and special correspondent to Liberia for the New York Evening Post. And he contributed regularly to periodicals such as The Nation, The Negro Digest, and The Reader's Digest. A rebel and satirist, Schuyler used his writing to critically analyze and sometimes assail what he saw as ridiculous in the Black movement. His most popular novel, Black No More, satirically presented a solution to Blacks' problems, a cream that would make the skin turn white. This was satire. Schuyler's only child was Philippa Schuyler, a musical prodigy who became internationally known for her piano concerts and humanitarian activities. He dissented from Marcus Garvey. He was an advocate of miscegenation. He was known as an anarchist. Okay? So that was how he approached racial Racism. Asa Philip Randolph, last one, born April 15th, 1889, passed May 16th, 1979. Asa Philip Randolph had a vision, a march on Washington in D.C. to demand, in 1941, Asa Philip Randolph had a vision, a march on Washington, D.C. to demand an end to racial discrimination in the defense industries. The march never took place. The threat of it persuaded President Franklin Roosevelt to sign an executive order prohibiting such discrimination. In 1948, Randolph's influence also helped to end segregation in the armed forces, because there was segregation in the armed forces. Randolph first achieved prominence for organizing the All-Black Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters in 1925. In 1937, after 12 years, in 1937, after 12 years of struggle with the Pullman Company, who owned the sleeping car service on a long-distance trains, he negotiated the first labor agreement by a black union with a major corporation. A lifelong civil rights worker and labor activist, Randolph realized his vision of 2 decades earlier when he organized and led the 1963 March on Washington. He received the Medal of Freedom from President Lyndon Johnson in 1964. He was an early supporter of Marcus Garvey, but later criticized him. Okay, so Asa Philip Randolph. All right, so we have Bayard Rustin, Martin Luther the King, Malcolm X, Ella Baker, George Schuyler, and Asa Philip Randolph. Thank you for getting lifted with me on these ABCs. I'll see you next time.